Have you ever wondered what the world would look like today if Africa had never been colonized? It's a huge question, and the answers are mind-blowing. Let's explore a reality where Africa was left to forge its own destiny, uninterrupted. First, let's talk about resources. Africa is incredibly rich in gold, oil, diamonds, cocoa, and rare minerals. In this alternate timeline, these resources would belong to Africans. They would be mined, refined, and sold by African nations for their own benefit. Imagine the wealth generated, funding infrastructure, healthcare, and education across the continent, instead of raw materials being shipped abroad for pennies on the dollar. Finished products would be exported, creating a powerful economic engine. The profits would build African cities, not foreign empires. Now, think about the great ancient kingdoms, empires like Mali, Songhai, Benin, Ethiopia, and Great Zimbabwe were centers of power, wealth, and knowledge. Without colonial disruption, these powerful states would have likely evolved. They could have become modern superstates, expanding their influence and adapting to the changing world on their own terms. Instead of being dismantled, their institutions would have grown stronger. We might be talking about the Songhai Federation or the Zimbabwean Union as major global players, with histories as long and proud as any nation in Europe or Asia. With control over its resources and stable, evolving kingdoms, Africa could easily be a global economic powerhouse. For centuries, Africa was a hub of global trade. Trans-Saharan trade routes connected West Africa to the Mediterranean, while the Swahili coast traded with Arabia, India, and even China. If this trade had continued to grow without interference, African economies would have flourished. They would have developed their own industrial revolutions, driven by their own needs and innovations. Today, we might see African corporations rivaling the biggest names from America, Europe, and Asia. The global economic landscape would be completely different, with African nations setting trends, not just following them. And what about language? Right now, English, French, and Portuguese are official languages in many African countries, a direct legacy of colonialism. But in a world without colonization, indigenous languages would dominate. Imagine Yoruba, Swahili, Hausa, Amharic, or Zulu being spoken on the world stage at the United Nations. These languages would have evolved, developed vast bodies of literature, and become languages of science, business, and diplomacy. Students around the world might be learning Swahili or Igbo as a second language, just as many learn English today. The richness and diversity of African languages would be celebrated globally. Education would also be fundamentally different. Colonial powers often imposed their own education systems, erasing or devaluing indigenous knowledge. But in an uncolonized Africa, education would be homegrown. Curricula would be based on African science, philosophy, medicine, and history. Students would learn about the mathematical wonders of the Shango bone, the astronomical knowledge of the Dogon people, or the philosophical traditions of Kemet. They would study their own heroes, their own histories, and their own scientific achievements. This wouldn't mean isolation. It would mean contributing to the world's pool of knowledge from a unique and powerful perspective. One of the most destructive legacies of colonialism is the borders. The scramble for Africa carved up the continent with arbitrary lines drawn on a map in Europe. These borders split ethnic groups apart and forced rival communities together, creating the seeds for countless conflicts and civil wars. Without colonization, borders would make sense. They would have formed naturally over time, following cultural, linguistic, and geographical lines. Nations would be more cohesive and stable. This would have saved millions of lives and prevented generations of turmoil, allowing societies to focus on progress and prosperity instead of conflict. Technology would have taken a different path, too. Innovation is always driven by local needs and environments. An uncolonized Africa would have developed technology suited to its own unique challenges and opportunities. We might see advanced agricultural techniques designed for tropical climates, innovative architectural styles that naturally cool buildings and the desert heat, or unique communication systems developed to connect vast territories. African technology wouldn't be a copy of Western models. It would be a distinct and creative force, born from African ingenuity. The world would be richer for this diversity of thought and problem-solving. Spirituality and culture would also have thrived without interruption. Traditional belief systems, art forms, and social values would have evolved naturally. They wouldn't have been labeled primitive or savage by outsiders. Instead, they would be seen for what they are: complex, sophisticated systems of understanding the world. The deep spiritual connection to nature, the emphasis on community, and the vibrant artistic expressions would have continued to shape societies in profound ways. We would see a world where African cultural norms and values are just as respected and understood as any other. Crucially, in this alternate reality, Africa would control its own narrative. For centuries, the story of Africa has been told by others, a story often filled with prejudice and misinformation. But if Africa had never been colonized, it would have defined itself. African historians, writers, and filmmakers would have told their own stories, celebrating their triumphs and analyzing their struggles on their own terms. The world's perception of Africa would be shaped by Africans, leading to a more accurate, respectful, and nuanced understanding of the continent and its people. Finally, think about migration. Today, many people migrate from Africa to Europe or North America seeking economic opportunities that were often diminished by colonial exploitation. In a prosperous, stable, and powerful Africa, this pattern could be reversed. The continent could become a magnet for talent from all over the world. People might be migrating to the bustling tech hubs of a modern Mali empire, or seeking to study at the ancient and renewed universities of Ethiopia. Africa would be a destination, a land of opportunity and innovation for everyone. Of course, this is all a what if. An uncolonized Africa would have faced its own challenges, its own wars, and its own internal struggles. No continent has a perfect history, but it's clear that the trajectory would have been vastly different. It would have been a path of self-determination, of innovation, and of power. By imagining this alternate reality, we can better understand the deep and lasting impact of history and recognize the incredible potential that has always been there. Thanks for watching and thinking about this with me. What do you think would be the biggest difference? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content that makes you think. See you next time.